She's the White House press secretary, used to bright lights and tough questions. But nothing prepared Karoline Leavitt for a snowstorm in rural Iowa and a broken-down SUV in the middle of nowhere. No phone, no signal, and freezing temperatures. Just when all hope seemed lost, a 13-year-old farm girl appeared through the snow. And what she did next changed both of their lives forever. This isn't just a story about a flat tire. It's about kindness, courage, and a decision that would ripple across an entire town. Stay tuned, because you won't believe how this ends. The sky over rural Iowa had turned a pale, threatening gray by the time Karoline Leavitt merged off the interstate onto a narrow two-lane road. Her SUV's headlights cut through the swirling flurries as she navigated the slush-covered pavement, returning from a political conference just north of Des Moines. The air outside was sharp, hovering around 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and growing colder by the minute. With each mile, the snow thickened, coating the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Still, Karoline pressed on. She had braved political firestorms, faced down reporters, and stood behind podiums under blinding lights. But this was different. She was alone. Her cell phone, mounted on the dashboard, had already dropped to no service. A soft vibration from the console confirmed what she feared. Her last attempt to send a message to her assistant hadn't gone through. She glanced at the screen. Battery at 8%. Not ideal. But she didn't panic. Not yet. The road narrowed further. Cornfields stretched endlessly on either side, now buried under a thick quilt of white. No buildings, no lights, just wind howling against the SUV's frame like a warning. Then came the sound. A harsh, low pop from beneath her feet. The vehicle lurched. A grinding thump echoed under the driver's side. Karoline gripped the steering wheel as the SUV pulled to the right, sliding on the icy road before jerking to a stop. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Tire pressure warning. Rear left tire. She exhaled sharply, jaw clenched. "Great," she muttered, pressing her forehead briefly against the steering wheel. A flat tire. In the middle of a snowstorm. On a road that might as well have been forgotten by time. Karoline stepped out into the bitter wind, her black heels crunching into packed snow. The gusts whipped her blonde hair across her face as she stepped around to the back of the vehicle. Sure enough, the rear left tire was completely deflated, half buried in slush and ice. The desert might be deadly in silence, but the Midwest snow could suffocate in its own way. Cold, slow, and merciless. Her usual press-ready composure cracked ever so slightly. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from the sheer cold. She reached for her phone again. Still no bars. Her heart sank lower. For a woman used to having cameras, assistants, and infrastructure all within reach, the isolation was jarring. No backup, no security detail, no microphones. Just the sound of wind screaming across the cornfields and snow swirling like ghosts in the headlights. She popped the trunk. There it was, the spare tire and a set of tools that looked as foreign to her as a battlefield manual. She'd been the voice of a national movement. But now, out here in the freezing dark, she was just one woman with no signal, no help, and one very flat tire. And so she stood there, frigid, frustrated, and utterly alone. Karoline Leavitt stood by her disabled SUV, wind biting at her cheeks and snow drifting over her boots. She hadn't moved in minutes, partly from cold, mostly from the shock of isolation. The world felt frozen, still, like even time had taken shelter. Her phone was dead. Her spare tire might as well have been a Rubik's Cube. She was running out of options. Then, movement. In the distance, through the haze of snow and dusk, a small figure emerged. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. But no. It was real. A silhouette walking toward her, slow but steady, cutting through the storm like it was nothing. The figure was small, no taller than 5 feet. As it drew closer, she could see more clearly. A young girl, maybe 12 or 13, bundled in layers of old, mismatched clothes. Her coat was too big. Her gloves didn't match. Her jeans were patched and faded, and trotting faithfully by her side was a dog. Karoline blinked. Is that a child? The girl approached with the kind of calm only someone native to this weather could possess. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her hair tucked under a wool hat that had seen better days. The dog, a shaggy golden mutt with intelligent eyes, stopped a few feet from Karoline and sniffed the air cautiously. You stuck? The girl asked, voice clear and unshaken by the cold. Karoline stared. Yes. Flat tire. Phone's dead. I've got no signal. The girl nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. Yeah, no one gets bars out here. You're lucky I saw your headlights. The dog wagged its tail once, then sat beside the girl. I'm Lucy Maynard. That's Buddy, she said, patting the dog's head. You from around here? Karoline shook her head. Washington, D.C., but I was in Iowa for a political event. Lucy raised an eyebrow. That's a long way from home to be stuck in a blizzard. Karoline managed a half smile. You have no idea. Without further comment, Lucy turned around and waved her arm toward the distant tree line. Come on. Our house isn't far. My dad's got a tractor. We'll pull you out. Karoline hesitated. She wasn't used to being helped, especially by a child. But the cold left no room for pride. She gave a nod, grabbing her handbag from the passenger seat before following the girl and her dog through the knee-deep snow. It took nearly 10 minutes to reach the small farmhouse tucked behind a row of bare trees. The structure was modest, 1 story, with a tin roof dusted in snow and smoke curling from a chimney. An old red tractor sat off to the side, partially buried under a tarp. A flickering porch light glowed like a beacon of warmth in the whitewashed landscape. Lucy opened the door and called out, Dad, we got a driver stuck on County Road 7. Needs a tow. From inside, a voice answered, deep and steady. Be right there, Luce. Karoline stepped through the doorway into a wave of heat. The interior was simple but welcoming. Wooden floors, a cast-iron stove radiating warmth, shelves lined with books, and hand-sewn curtains on the windows. The air smelled of cinnamon and old pine. Lucy brushed off snow and kicked off her boots. Sit down, ma'am, she said, motioning to a worn but comfortable armchair near the stove. You must be frozen. Karoline took the seat, unsure whether to smile or cry. The sudden warmth, the unexpected kindness. It hit harder than she expected. She watched as Lucy poured hot cocoa from a chipped kettle into a ceramic mug and handed it over without hesitation. Here, the girl said. Grandma's recipe. Cocoa, milk, little bit of honey. Karoline took the mug in her gloved hands and sipped. It was rich, sweet and warming, soothing more than just her body. Thank you, she murmured. The door creaked open again and a man stepped in, tall, broad-shouldered, with a gray beard and a cap pulled low. He nodded once, assessing the situation with a calm, rural practicality. I'm Walter Maynard. Lucy tells me you've got a flat out by the ridge. That's right, Karoline replied, standing. Karoline Leavitt. Walter raised an eyebrow slightly, then nodded again. Name rings a bell. Seen you on the news, maybe. Karoline gave a small chuckle. That happens. Well, he said, already pulling on his snow-covered coat. Let's get you out of there before you freeze solid. She watched through the frosted window as Walter fired up the old tractor, its engine coughing before roaring to life. 10 minutes later, they were back at her SUV. With Lucy holding the flashlight and Buddy guarding the rear bumper like it was his job, Walter chained the undercarriage and carefully towed the vehicle out of the ditch. It wasn't fast, but it was steady. When it was done, the SUV sat level again on the snowy road, still wounded, but movable. Back at the farmhouse, Karoline insisted on waiting until morning to drive. Visibility was poor, and the roads worse. The Maynards didn't argue. They made up the couch with extra blankets and offered her a slice of warm apple pie from dinner. She sat quietly by the stove, cocoa in hand, watching the snow fall through the window, listening to Lucy hum softly as she petted Buddy by the fire. They didn't ask who she voted for. They didn't ask for anything. They simply saw someone in trouble and helped. No cameras, no speeches, no press, just people. As the wind howled outside and the snow kept falling, Karoline felt something unfamiliar press against her chest. Gratitude. Yes, but something deeper. A quiet warmth she hadn't felt in years. It came from a 13-year-old girl in hand-me-down boots and a family that didn't think twice about pulling a stranger from the snow. And that, more than the tractor or the cocoa, might have been the real rescue that night. The snowstorm outside showed no sign of slowing, blanketing the windows with thick frost and muffling every sound beyond the little farmhouse walls. Inside, it was still, warm, quiet, and filled with the crackle of logs in the cast-iron stove. Karoline Leavitt, White House Press Secretary, sat at the small wooden kitchen table with Lucy and her father, a steaming plate of potato stew before her. It was a humble dinner, served with no pretense, just a bowl of homemade food, a chipped glass of well water, and a silence that somehow felt respectful, not awkward. Lucy sat across from Karoline, her legs swinging just slightly beneath the table. Buddy the dog lay curled up on a faded rug, his nose twitching now and then, dreaming of whatever dogs dream of. Karoline glanced around the modest room, rough wooden walls, a set of antique dishes neatly arranged on a shelf, and a single string of old Christmas lights still glowing gently along the top of the window frame. It was clear that the Maynards lived simply, but with care. Everything had its place. Everything mattered. After a few bites, Walter leaned back in his chair and asked casually, "So, Ms. Leavitt, what brings you all the way out to these parts in weather like this?" Karoline smiled faintly, stirring her stew. "A campaign event in Iowa. I took a detour to avoid some press traffic and, well, you know the rest." Walter nodded knowingly. "Bad roads in good weather. In a blizzard, they'll eat you alive." Lucy giggled quietly, then looked up at Karoline with an unexpected boldness in her eyes. "I've seen you on TV before. You talk real fast and don't let those reporters push you around." Karoline laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "You watch the news?" "Only sometimes," Lucy said with a shrug. "But I like how you talk. You sound like you know what you're doing." Karoline tilted her head, slightly taken aback. Praise wasn't new to her, but coming from a 13-year-old in an old wool sweater, it hit differently. "What do you want to do someday, Lucy?" Karoline asked, genuinely curious. The girl didn't hesitate. "I want to be an engineer." Karoline blinked. "Really?" "Yeah," Lucy said, her voice steady. "I like figuring out how things work. Dad's got this old radio in the shed. I took it apart last summer, fixed it up myself. Then I built a little windmill behind the barn. It powers a lamp in my room." Karoline's spoon paused midway to her mouth. Walter chuckled. "She's always taking things apart. Half the kitchen gadgets don't survive a weekend if I leave her alone too long." Lucy smiled sheepishly. "I don't mean to break them. I just like to learn." Karoline leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Do you get to do that in school?" Lucy's smile faded just a little. Our school's small. Real small. The library doesn't have much. And we don't have a computer lab or anything like that. I learn what I can from books we find at garage sales. Or Dad prints stuff out when he's in town. Karoline glanced toward the living room. There, by the old stove, sat a tiny wooden desk, clearly handmade, maybe by Walter himself. On it sat a small oil lamp, a cracked mug filled with pencils, and a neat stack of dog-eared books on science and engineering. One was held together with tape. Another was missing a cover entirely. Karoline's chest tightened. No high-speed internet. No digital tablets. No fancy STEM curriculum or after-school robotics club. Just a girl, a lamp, and a dream, burning brightly in the middle of nowhere. Lucy seemed to sense the shift in Karoline's expression. I know it's kind of silly. Most people want to be famous or rich. I just want to build stuff that helps people. Make life easier, safer. Like bridges that don't collapse in storms. Or heaters that work even when the power's out. Karoline swallowed hard. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. But in that moment, the world felt utterly still. She thought about the Capitol, about marble columns and high-speed elevators and $7 coffees. She thought about the emails she hadn't answered yet, the interview she was supposed to prep for tomorrow, the headlines waiting to be shaped and spun. And yet here, in this small kitchen in rural Iowa, a 13-year-old girl had just reminded her why she'd ever believed in public service at all. It's not silly, Lucy, Karoline said quietly, her voice lower than usual. It's the most important dream I've heard in a long time. Lucy blushed. Thanks. Walter cleared his throat gently. College isn't cheap, and our insurance doesn't cover much when it comes to extras. But we do what we can. Karoline nodded, biting her tongue before she said too much. Her mind was racing. She couldn't stop picturing that desk, the oil lamp, the taped books, the quiet persistence of a child who didn't know how remarkable she was. That image would stay with her. After dinner, as they cleaned up, Lucy disappeared into the living room and returned holding a small model windmill, crafted from popsicle sticks and salvaged wire. She placed it on the table in front of Karoline. I made this last fall, she said. It doesn't look like much, but it works. Karoline examined it closely, then looked up at Lucy with something she rarely showed in public. A hint of awe. It looks like a beginning, she said. That night, Karoline lay on the couch beneath a thick quilt, staring at the ceiling beams. She couldn't sleep. Not because of the storm or the strange bed, but because something in her had shifted. In a world spinning fast on politics, headlines, and power, she had found something rare. A girl with patched jeans and brilliant hands, a family with nothing to gain who still gave freely, and a dream flickering by an oil lamp in the corner of a warm farmhouse. Karoline closed her eyes and whispered, God, don't let me forget this. And somewhere, not far away, a windmill turned quietly in the night. Back in Washington, D.C., the marble corridors of the West Wing echoed with the usual rhythm. Staffers hustling past with clipboards, journalists hovering near briefing rooms, and aides murmuring updates into earpieces. But for Karoline Leavitt, none of it felt the same anymore. The buzz that once thrilled her, the daily grind of media spin and political maneuvering, now rang hollow in her ears. She sat in her corner office, the Capitol dome visible through the frosted glass, and stared blankly at a stack of briefing folders, talking points, polling numbers, foreign policy memos. But her mind wasn't in the nation's capital. It was still in Iowa. It was still at that tiny kitchen table in a house patched with love. Still with Lucy, her wind-chapped cheeks, bright eyes, and a windmill made from popsicle sticks and spare wire. That image haunted her, in the best way. It wouldn't let go. Every night since returning, Karoline had lain awake longer than usual, the weight of responsibility pressing differently on her chest. Her calendar was packed: network interviews, campaign events, closed-door strategy sessions. But none of it quieted the voice inside her that whispered, "Go back." On the fifth morning, over lukewarm coffee and a cold DC sunrise, she made the decision. She looked her assistant in the eye and said firmly, "Cancel my Thursday through Sunday." The assistant blinked, startled. "Ma'am, you've got Fox at noon Thursday, the National Security Roundtable Friday, and dinner with the Donor Council Saturday." Karoline didn't hesitate. "Cancel them all. I need to go back to Iowa." There was a beat of silence. "To that town?" the assistant asked cautiously. Karoline nodded slowly. "Yes. To that town. To that girl." She didn't offer more details. She didn't need to. The decision wasn't political. It was personal. It was a gut-deep resolve. The kind that didn't need explanation. Within hours, she was on a red-eye flight back to Des Moines, bundled in a wool coat and scarf, her eyes fixed out the plane window. The snow still blanketed Iowa like a story frozen in time. But this time, she wasn't coming to survive a storm. She was coming to start something. The morning she arrived, Karoline didn't waste a moment. At the airport terminal, as soon as her boots hit the linoleum floor, she pulled out her phone and started dialing. Her fingers moved fast. These weren't campaign donors. These were old friends, trusted allies, men and women who'd stood beside her since her earliest political days. People who still believed in something bigger than headlines and elections. "I need your help," she told them, voice direct and unwavering. "Not for a vote, not for a poll, for a girl." That's when she shared Lucy's story, not in a press release, not at a podium, but in heartfelt, one-on-one calls. She described the windmill, the oil lamp, the bookshelf of fraying paperbacks. She didn't embellish a word. She didn't have to. One by one, they said the same thing. "What do you need?" And just like that, the Lucy Center was born, not as a campaign stunt or a PR move, but as a mission. The vision was clear in Karoline's mind. A community space right in that rural Iowa town. A place where children like Lucy could explore engineering, mechanics, design. A place with proper lighting, modern tools, broadband internet, and real mentors. Not a handout. A launch pad. As she sketched plans in her hotel room that night, the energy surged through her fingers. She hadn't felt this kind of fire in years, not since she first stood behind the White House podium and faced a wall of flashing cameras with nothing but truth and grit. The next day, she met with a local Iowa contractor. She took a tour of available lots. She called her finance team in D.C. and got legal clearance to start a charitable foundation under her name. "This isn't just about Lucy," she told them. "It's about kids across this country who are forgotten. We talk about the future all the time. Well, it's time we build it." The momentum grew like a snowball rolling downhill. Small donors chipped in through a quiet website her tech aides spun up overnight. A private trucking company offered to ship supplies for free. A retired STEM teacher from Omaha emailed her personally, asking to volunteer as an instructor when the center opened. In 48 hours, the Lucy Center went from a whispered dream to a formal plan, with renderings, cost estimates, and community buy-in. But beneath the logistics, the flight schedules, the spreadsheets, Karoline's heart beat with something deeper. She was no longer doing this just for Lucy. She was doing this for herself, for the version of her that had almost been lost in the blizzard of ambition. For the little girl she'd once been. The one who asked, "Why not?" instead of, "What's the angle?" That night, as she stood in the half-empty diner where she'd first met Lucy's father, Karoline looked out the window and watched the snow fall again. Slow, steady, silent. But this time, she didn't feel helpless. She felt driven. Outside, a pair of kids passed by, dragging a plastic sled down the sidewalk. Inside, the waitress refilled her coffee and said gently, "We don't get many famous folks back around here. What brings you back?" Karoline smiled faintly. "A promise I made. One I intend to keep. Because some promises aren't political. They're personal. And sometimes the most important campaign isn't the one you run on a ballot, but the one you run for a better tomorrow." By the time the frost had lifted over rural Iowa, change was already breaking ground, both literally and figuratively. Where once stood a weathered old house clinging to the past, now rose a home, rebuilt with care, compassion, and the quiet determination of one woman who simply couldn't forget. Karoline Leavitt, White House Press Secretary, returned not with cameras or fanfare, but with carpenters, electricians, and blueprints. The Maynard home was the first priority. The structure, once bowed by wind and time, was carefully reinforced. Walls insulated against the brutal Midwestern winters. Windows refitted, no longer fogged with age. The roof, once patched with plastic tarps, now gleamed in clean slate-gray shingles under a cold morning sun. Inside, the transformation was even more powerful. Gone was the flickering oil lamp by Lucy's makeshift desk. In its place now stood a sturdy work table fitted with a proper reading lamp, shelves of brand-new textbooks, and a second-hand laptop, donated by a veteran engineer who'd heard the story and wanted to help. The kitchen sparkled with simple but vital upgrades. A modern stove, new cabinetry, fresh tiles. Even the living room, with its old threadbare sofa, had been refreshed. New cushions, fresh paint, and a handmade quilt gifted by a local church group that insisted on contributing something warm. But it wasn't just the house. Just beyond the Maynards' back field, where frost once bit the earth, a new shape rose. The Lucy Center. Karoline had named it herself, and the lettering now gleamed proudly across the entrance of the newly built facility, painted a calm blue, standing firm against the snow-speckled sky. In just a few weeks, crews had turned a vacant lot into a hub of hope. Inside, the center featured a garage-style learning bay equipped with real tools, donated workbenches, and basic power systems. There were classrooms too, simple but bright, with chalkboards, folding chairs, and rows of desktop computers. A handful of retired mechanics, welders, and former teachers had volunteered to teach weekend sessions, with a curriculum centered on hands-on skills: small engine repair, woodwork, basic circuitry. Children from across the county began to trickle in, their curiosity outweighing the bitter cold. For Karoline, it was more than progress. It was a mission fulfilled. One afternoon, as she stood near the workbench where Lucy was learning how to wire a circuit board under the guidance of a retired Navy electrician, she heard a faint sound behind her. Turning, she saw Walter Maynard, hat in hand, eyes misting. "I don't know what to say," he began, his voice catching in his throat. "I've worked hard my whole life, Ms. Leavitt, but I could never have given her this. Not in 100 years. Karoline stepped forward slowly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You gave her everything that matters, Walter. You gave her heart. I just helped with the tools." Walter blinked hard, brushing his sleeve across his face. "She has a scholarship now, Lucy, a full ride. How do I even say thank you for that?" Karoline smiled, eyes softening. "By letting her use it." Indeed, Lucy had been awarded a full scholarship, a collaboration between Karoline's contacts and a rural youth STEM foundation based in Minnesota. She would begin attending a regional boarding high school that specialized in engineering and applied sciences, starting in the fall. The moment Lucy opened the letter, her mittened hands trembling as she read the words, "Full tuition granted." Her knees gave out from beneath her. Karoline caught her just in time. "Is this real?" Lucy asked through tears. "It's as real as your dreams," Karoline whispered back. The news spread through the town like wildfire, not in the form of newspaper headlines or televised interviews, but around diner booths and Sunday morning church pews. The girl from the snow, the city woman who came back, the center built from kindness. It all sounded almost too good to be true, but it was true. Karoline stayed in Iowa for one final week, overseeing the last fixtures at the center and ensuring Lucy and Walter had everything they needed. She declined all interviews, ignoring the many emails from national outlets who had caught wind of her sudden disappearance from the DC scene. She didn't want this to be a press event. This wasn't about politics. It never had been. One evening, as the sun dipped below the silos, Karoline stood at the threshold of the Lucy Center, watching a small group of children huddled around a table, learning to sketch engine designs. She turned to Walter, who had come by after his shift at the local feed store. "This is how it should feel," she said softly. "Like we're building something real." He nodded. "Feels like hope." Karoline didn't respond at first. She simply watched Lucy from a distance, her hair tied back, brow furrowed in focus, hands steady as she adjusted the tiny wires on her practice project. For a girl once studying by lantern light, she now looked perfectly at home among tools and possibility. That night, back at her modest rental near the edge of town, Karoline called her husband. Her voice was tired but content. "She's going to make it," she told him. "Not just Lucy, all of them. This center, it's bigger than I thought it would be." Her husband, holding their 8-month-old son back in DC, simply said, "I'm proud of you." And in that moment, Karoline realized she was proud of herself too, not for her titles or televised speeches, but for doing something that left the world just a little better than she found it. When she finally boarded the flight back to Washington, Karoline took with her more than luggage. She carried a new sense of purpose, a personal mission renewed. And tucked carefully inside her coat pocket was a hand-drawn thank you card from Lucy, folded neatly, sealed with tape. On the front, in pencil-sketched block letters, it read, "Thank you for seeing me." The wind was calm that afternoon in rural Iowa. The snow had long since melted, leaving behind the smell of thawed earth and fresh timber. The final touches had been made, the ribbons were in place, and small folding chairs lined up neatly in front of the brand-new community center, its soft blue paint catching the sunlight just right. The sign above the door read in modest silver letters, "The Lucy Center." Karoline Leavitt stood quietly at the back of the small crowd, her heels dug gently into the soft ground, her hands folded in front of her coat. No cameras, no press releases, just townsfolk, volunteers, and the small rural children the center was built for. At the front stood Lucy Maynard, 13 years old, her best Sunday sweater pressed, her braids neatly tied back. She took a nervous step toward the simple wooden podium built by one of the local fathers. A hush fell over the crowd. Karoline's heart beat steady, but her eyes shimmered. She didn't prepare this speech, didn't even know what Lucy might say. And in that silence, something sacred settled in the air. "Hi, everyone," Lucy began, her voice small but growing stronger with each word. "I never thought anything like this would happen. I used to think dreams were only for people in big cities or on TV, but then, one night during a snowstorm, someone came to our house. Someone who didn't know us. And everything changed." Karoline blinked rapidly, swallowing the emotions swelling in her chest. Lucy looked out at the crowd, eyes clear and full of truth. "Miss Karoline, You didn't just fix our home. You believed in me. You made me believe in myself. And now this center. It's not just for me. It's for every kid who thought they were too small, too poor, or too far away to matter. There it was. The sentence that shattered and mended Karoline's heart in the same breath. A tear rolled down her cheek, catching in the corner of her smile. She had stood at podiums before. In D.C., in front of cameras, in crowded rooms filled with journalists ready to strike. But none of those moments ever moved her like this. A 13-year-old girl in front of a humble community, speaking truth without a script and meaning every word. When the short speech ended, the crowd applauded, warm and real. Lucy turned to step down and her eyes caught Karoline's. The two locked gazes for a second too long, and Lucy gave a quick wave, shy and sweet. Karoline raised a hand back, heart thudding with a weight she hadn't expected. The ceremony wrapped up soon after, with cookies and lemonade passed around, and kids darting in and out of the new classrooms with curiosity. Karoline didn't linger in the spotlight. She walked slowly to her car, parked a little ways down the hill, where the center looked like a beacon from afar. As she closed the door behind her, she sat still for a moment. The leather seat felt colder than usual, but her heart felt full. So full it almost hurt. She reached for her phone and opened a new message. To Nicholas. I want to spend more time with the family. She paused, then added, I think I finally understand what really matters. She hit send. The reply came a few seconds later. Come home, Karoline. We've missed you. On the road back to Washington, D.C., Karoline drove without music. Just the sound of the tires on the pavement and the wind brushing past her window. Her mind drifted, not to press briefings or campaign strategy, but to Lucy. To the sound of her voice at the podium. To that makeshift desk near the wood stove she'd once studied at. To the way Walter cried when he realized his daughter's future had shifted in a single season. She thought of how she'd come into their lives completely by chance. Stranded in a snowstorm, frustrated, cold, alone. And how a child with nothing but a kind heart and an old dog had pulled her back towards something she didn't know she was missing. And what she gave in return. A new house, a learning center, a scholarship, paled in comparison to what she had received. Perspective. Purpose. Peace. All her life, she had been admired for her strength, her clarity in the political arena, her loyalty to her beliefs. But this time, it wasn't a room of journalists she'd had to face. It was herself. And Lucy, with her warm heart and dusty boots, had held up the mirror. Back in D.C., Karoline quietly adjusted her schedule. She canceled 2 evening panels, postponed a media dinner, and blocked out 2 full weekends on her calendar. For the first time in months, she was there to bathe her son, rock him to sleep, watch his chest rise and fall in the crib without checking email between breaths. She didn't announce any of this to the press. It wasn't part of a strategy. It was personal. 1 month later, a quiet op-ed appeared in a Midwestern magazine. Not ghostwritten, not edited by staff, just Karoline's own words. A snowstorm stranded me. A child welcomed me. And in that moment I realized I had been racing so long, I forgot why I ran in the first place. The true American story isn't only built in Washington. It's built in places like rural Iowa, in homes warmed by kindness and dreams lit by kerosene lamps. If I ever lose my way again, I know where to look. Readers across the country shared it. Quietly, proudly. Tears welled in the eyes of grandparents, parents, neighbors who remembered what mattered before the noise took over. The Lucy Center went on to receive additional funding. A new wing was planned, more kids enrolled. And Karoline, once just a powerful voice on television, became something else entirely. She became a part of someone's turning point. And for a woman who had mastered the art of public influence, the private transformation was even more powerful. She didn't need applause. She had Lucy, she had purpose. And that was more than enough. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected places. A snowy road, a quiet child, or a moment of helplessness. Karoline's story reminds us that no matter how far we've come in life, it's never too late to rediscover what truly matters. Kindness, purpose, and the power of giving back. In a fast-paced world, it's these small, sincere moments that shape our legacy. So take a breath, lend a hand, and remember, what you do for others may just be the very thing that transforms you. Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more real American stories that touch the heart.